The explosion ripped through the courthouse steps, a sudden, violent force that sent glass and debris flying into the autumn air. Screams pierced the chaos as people ran in all directions, desperate to escape the thick, suffocating smoke. But Elena Carter couldn't move. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her wide eyes locked on the burning wreckage, the mangled remains of a car that had belonged to her father. The heat from the flames licked at her skin, but she barely felt it. "Dad." Her voice cracked as she tried to lunge forward. A firm grip yanked her back. "Miss, you can't. It's not safe." She barely registered the officer restraining her, barely heard the voices shouting, the sirens wailing in the distance. None of it mattered. All that mattered was that her father, Judge Nathaniel Carter, had been inside that car moments before it exploded. The case he had been overseeing had made him a target. She knew that. But nothing could have prepared her for this. And as the courthouse faded into smoke and chaos, Elena realized her world would never be the same again. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and faded hope. Elena sat in the dim light, her fingers curled tightly on her father's unmoving hand. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady yet fragile. The doctors had laid out the facts in cold, clinical tones. There was an option, an experimental procedure that could save him. But the cost was staggering. More money than she could ever dream of having. Elena had exhausted every avenue, chased every possible solution, only to come up empty. Her head dropped into her hands, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. A knock at the door made her jolt upright. She turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, a man stepped inside. Damien Wolfe. His name alone was enough to make her blood run cold. Powerful, untouchable. The kind of man who made headlines for billion-dollar deals and ruthless takeovers. He was the last person she expected to see here. "Elena Carter," he greeted, his deep voice smooth, unreadable. "I assume you know who I am." She did, and that was exactly why she didn't trust him. Her fingers curled against the blanket. "What do you want?" Damien didn't answer right away. He took a slow glance around the hospital room before meeting her gaze. "I have an offer for you." Elena stiffened. Of course he did. Men like Damien Wolfe didn't show up without a reason. "I'm not interested." His lips twitched, a ghost of amusement. "You haven't heard the terms. I don't need to." He ignored that. "Your father needs urgent treatment in Switzerland. The cost, $8 million. The number landed like a physical blow. She had never spoken that amount out loud, but she had memorized it, had seen it scrawled across every rejected loan application, every funding request that ended in disappointment. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I make it my business to know things." He took another step closer. The air between them felt heavy. "I'll cover it, every last cent." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. There was no such thing as free with men like him. Her voice was tight. "And in return?" Damien's expression didn't change. "Marry me." The words hit like ice water. She blinked, sure she had misheard him. What?" He folded his hands behind his back, composed as ever. "A legal marriage, nothing more. A transaction, a contract, a deal wrapped in a wedding vow." Elena let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You can't be serious." Damien tilted his head slightly. "I don't make jokes, Miss Carter." His gaze locked onto hers, steady, unwavering. "You need money. I need a wife." Simple, cold, as if he hadn't just turned her world upside down. Elena shot to her feet, heat rising in her chest. "Marriage isn't a—" Damien barely blinked at her outburst. "In my world, everything is a business deal." His voice was cool, unaffected. "You would have access to my resources, live comfortably, and, most importantly, your father would receive the treatment he needs." He leaned back slightly, studying her. "In return, you would take on the role of Mrs. Wolfe at social and business functions. A minimum of 1 year." Elena's gaze flickered to her father's pale face, to the rhythmic beeping of the machines keeping him alive. A year, her freedom or his life. The walls seemed to close in around her. "Why me?" she asked, stalling for time, trying to process the absurdity of his proposal. For the first time since stepping into the room, Damien hesitated. "You have a reputation for intelligence, discretion, and composure," he said at last. "You know how to handle yourself in social settings, and you're presentable." His gaze swept over her, cool and assessing. Elena clenched her fists, her skin prickling at the way he evaluated her like a business asset. But before she could snap back, he continued. More importantly, you have no romantic entanglements that could interfere, and you need something only I can provide. She exhaled sharply. It's efficient, he added, as if that somehow made it reasonable. Elena let out a bitter laugh. Efficient? You're talking about my life. I'm talking about saving your father's, he countered. Silence stretched between them. Then, without another word, Damien reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the table beside her father's bed. The paperwork is ready. You have 24 hours. He turned to leave, his movements precise, controlled, every step measured. But just as he reached the door, Elena called after him. Mr. Wolf. He paused, glancing back. Has anyone ever told you that you have the emotional depth of a calculator? For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. All the time, Miss Carter, he said smoothly. I'll await your call. Then he was gone. Elena slumped back into her chair, her heart pounding. A marriage of convenience to the coldest man in the city, or watching her father die, knowing she could have saved him. Some choice. But what Damien Wolf didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that if she said yes, she wouldn't just sit back and accept her fate. No. If she was going to sell her freedom, she was going to make sure the ruthless billionaire got more than he bargained for. Much more. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized. Elena stared at herself, her fingers gripping the porcelain sink as if grounding herself before stepping into another life. 24 hours had passed, and she had made her decision. Not that there had ever really been a choice. You can do this, she whispered, straightening her shoulders. 1 year. Just 1 year of your life for Dad's future. Her phone buzzed. A text. The car is waiting downstairs. Of course. Damien wouldn't even bother coming up himself. Everything in his world is a transaction. Elena grabbed her worn leather purse, a stark contrast to the life she was about to step into, and took one last look around her apartment. The mismatched furniture, the overflowing bookshelf, the wall of photos, her father's proud smile in each one. A life built with love, not money. A life she was leaving behind. Sterling Tower loomed over the city, a fortress of glass and steel that reflected the skyline in sharp, perfect angles. It felt cold, unforgiving. Elena stepped into the vast marble lobby, acutely aware of the curious glances cast in her direction. She didn't belong here. A woman with impossibly straight posture and an ironed ponytail approached, her presence as sharp as her fitted suit. Miss Carter, she said, her tone clipped. Follow me. No introduction, no pleasantries. Elena squared her shoulders and walked beside her, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Then, as the doors slid open, the woman gestured toward a sleek conference room. Mr. Wolf will be with you shortly. And with that, she turned on her heel and disappeared. Elena exhaled, steeling herself. The deal was about to begin. The CEO will see you shortly. The assistant's tone made it clear that shortly meant precisely when Damien Wolf decided it was convenient, not a second sooner. Elena didn't bother sitting. Instead, she crossed the sleek conference room and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city sprawled below. Somewhere in that endless maze of glass and steel was a hospital where her father lay unconscious, completely unaware that his daughter was about to sign away her freedom to save his life. The view is one of the building's greatest features. Damien's voice came from behind her. Elena turned. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. Today, the natural light from the windows made his steel-gray eyes seem even colder. His charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, only added to his aura of control. I prefer what's beyond the view, she said. Real people. Living real lives. Something flickered across his face. Curiosity, perhaps, but it was gone before she could decipher it. With a slight motion of his hand, he gestured to the long, polished conference table. A thick stack of papers lay waiting. The contract, he said, as if it weren't already obvious. My legal team has ensured every detail is accounted for. Elena approached the table, but she didn't reach for the pen. Instead, she pulled out her phone. I brought my own lawyer. Damien's brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing as she pressed dial. The call connected instantly. Elena, Tell me you're not actually doing this, came Mia Rodriguez's voice, sharp and unfiltered. Elena put her on speaker. The Ice King is in the room, she said flatly. There was a brief pause. Then Mia's voice rang out, completely unfazed. Ah, Mr. Corporate Overlord, just so you know, if you mistreat my girl, I do know 17 different ways to make a death look like natural causes. I watch a lot of true crime. Elena almost smiled at Damien's reaction, just the faintest flicker of something unreadable in his otherwise impenetrable expression. Mia, on the other hand, sounded downright cheerful. For the record, Elena continued, Mia graduated top of her class, passed the bar on her first try, and now works at the public defender's office because, unlike some people, she actually has a soul. Mia hummed in approval. That's right, and I've already prepared amendments to the contract. Elena is emailing them over now. A muscle in Damien's jaw flexed. Without a word, he gestured to his assistant. Vivienne, a woman so polished she looked like she had ironed her ponytail, who immediately printed out the documents. Perhaps we should review these together, Damien said, scanning the pages. Elena folded her arms. They're non-negotiable. His gaze lifted. Sharp, assessing. You want a business transaction? Fine, but I'm not signing away my entire existence. Damien didn't speak, so she continued. I keep my job. I keep my own bank account. I have veto power over public appearances if they interfere with my father's treatment. And when this contract ends, you will fund a foundation in his name for victims of judicial intimidation. Silence. Damien studied her, something unreadable shifting in his gaze, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. You've given this a lot of thought. She held his gaze, refusing to waver. That's what happens when someone tries to purchase you, Mr. Wolf, she said, voice steady. You figure out what you're worth. A charged silence filled the room. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Damien picked up a pen. Your terms are acceptable, he said smoothly. Relief washed through her, until he added, with one condition of my own. Elena tensed. Which is? You'll move into my penthouse, immediately. She opened her mouth to argue, but he was already anticipating it. For appearances, he said, the press will find it suspicious if we live separately after the wedding. The wedding. The word made everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. Elena exhaled. And when exactly is this wedding supposed to happen? Damien glanced at his watch. Tomorrow, he said. She blinked. Tomorrow, he nodded. City Hall, I've arranged everything. Her breath caught in her throat. This is efficient, he finished for her. And just like that, the deal was sealed. Your father's airlift to Switzerland is scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Time is of the essence, Miss Carter. Damien's voice was calm, steady, completely unaffected by the weight of the decision Elena was about to make. She closed her eyes briefly, reminding herself why she was doing this. When she opened them, she reached for the pen in his hand. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting moment. But the jolt that ran through her at the contact caught her off guard. She pulled back quickly, masking her reaction. One more thing, she said, voice firm. Damien waited, expression unreadable. In public you treat me with respect, she continued. No one can know this is anything but a genuine relationship. I won't be humiliated or treated like an accessory. A pause. His gaze flickered, something unreadable shifting in the cool steel of his eyes. Respect? Surprise? Maybe both. Agreed, he said simply. Elena exhaled. Then, with steady hands, she signed her name. Each stroke of the pen sealed her fate. When she finished, she looked up to find Damien watching her. There was an intensity in his stare, calculated, observant. Congratulations, Miss Carter, he said, signing his own name beneath hers. You are now the future Mrs. Wolf. And you, she replied sweetly, though the sharpness in her tone was unmistakable, have just purchased yourself the world's most reluctant bride. For the briefest moment, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing she'd seen. I'll have Vivienne coordinate the moving of your belongings, he said, rising from his chair. Is there anything specific you require at the penthouse? Elena thought of her small apartment, the warmth, the familiarity. Then she imagined Damien's home, sterile, vast, and devoid of life. Just one thing, she said. He raised an eyebrow. And that is? A plant. A beat of silence. A plant? Yes, She met his gaze, unwavering. Something alive to balance out all the steel and glass I imagine you surround yourself with. Damien studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something. Elena reached for her purse, eager to escape the strange weight of his attention. Consider it the first of many changes coming your way, Mr. Wolf. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Elena. She hesitated. He had never called her by her first name before. If we're getting married tomorrow, he said, his tone smooth, perhaps you should start calling me Damien. She glanced back at him, just enough for their eyes to meet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, she said lightly. Then, with a smirk, she added, Damien. She left him standing there, contract in hand, a flicker of something unrateable in his expression. A small victory. And in a battle of wills against Damien Wolf, she would take every small victory she could get. What she didn't know was, Damien was thinking precisely the same thing about her. I now pronounce you husband and wife. The city clerk snapped her booklet shut, looking expectantly between them. You may kiss the bride. Elena froze. That hadn't been in the contract. But before she could react, Damien stepped forward smoothly, placing a hand lightly on her waist. His movements were effortless, practiced. Then, instead of pressing his lips to hers, he dipped down and brushed them against her cheek, close enough for anyone watching to believe it, distant enough to remind her that this was nothing more than a transaction. His cologne, expensive, subtle, filled her senses. For appearances, he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. Elena nodded stiffly. Across the room, Mia shot Damien a glare so sharp it could have cut through glass, while simultaneously giving Elena a thumbs up. Outside City Hall, a sleek black Bentley waited at the curb. The second Damien stepped out, the photographers appeared, like vultures sensing fresh prey. Mr. Wolf, is it true you just got married? Who's the lucky woman? Over here, look this way. Flashes exploded around them. Elena instinctively recoiled, but Damien didn't. His grip tightened around her waist. Not possessive, not controlling, just enough to steady her, just enough to remind her that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The flashing cameras were relentless. Elena kept her expression neutral, her body tense as she walked beside Damien. Then she felt it, his arm, firm yet effortless, settling around her shoulders, a guiding force, steady and controlled. Smile, he murmured, barely moving his lips. This is the most efficient way to announce our marriage. Her stomach twisted. You planned this, she accused under her breath, forcing a smile for the cameras. Of course, Damien replied, his voice as smooth as ever. He reached for the car door, opening it with the kind of practiced ease that almost felt gallant. Wolf Industries stock will rise by at least 3 points by market close once the news breaks of my settling down. Elena shot him a look. Of course you'd quantify this too. Ignoring her, Damien gestured for her to get in. She slid into the car, exhaling in relief as the tinted windows blocked out the chaos. Damien joined her in the back seat, immediately pulling out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly over the screen, precise and unbothered. A second later, he spoke. Your father's airlift is confirmed for tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. The medical team says he's stable for transport. Elena's resentment wavered for a moment, cut through by something unexpected. Gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. Damien glanced up from his phone as if caught off guard by her sincerity. For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Almost human. Then just as quickly, he looked away. It's part of our agreement, he said dismissively. Still, Elena held his gaze. That doesn't change the fact that you saved his life. He shifted slightly, as if the words made him uncomfortable. The penthouse is ready for your arrival, he said, changing the subject. I had your belongings moved while we were at City Hall. Her heart sank. Strangers touching her things, packing up her life. She took a breath. Even my plant? That seemed to catch him off guard. Yes, he admitted after a pause. Then, with the faintest flicker of amusement, he added, though I can't guarantee it will survive. It looked unwell. Elena crossed her arms. Mr. Pickles just needs some attention. Damien blinked. You named your plant Mr. Pickles? Don't judge me, Alex. She shot back, a teasing lilt in her voice. We've been married less than an hour. His expression barely changed, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Damien, he corrected. Definitely Alex, she countered, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction when she saw the faint furrow between his brows. If she had to endure this arrangement, she might as well entertain herself by chipping away at his perfectly controlled facade. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a high-rise in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Elena barely breathed as the private elevator ascended. Her stomach knotted. She was about to see firsthand how the other half, no, the other 0.001 cent, lived. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a space that was both exactly what she had expected and somehow not. The architecture was cold, precise, monochrome design, sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. But there were details that surprised her. Rare art pieces, hand-picked rather than purchased thoughtlessly, and most unexpectedly, books, shelves upon shelves of them, lining an entire wall. She stepped forward instinctively, fingers brushing the leather-bound spines. "You read?" she blurted before she could stop herself. The words echoed, sounding almost accusatory. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Did you assume I process information solely through spreadsheets and financial reports?" Elena hesitated. The thought had crossed my mind. He studied her for a moment, then walked past her, running a hand lightly along the bookshelves. "Some are first editions," he said. "My grandfather started the collection. Reading was the one indulgence he permitted himself." It was the first real piece of personal information he had given her. She tucked it away. "Where's my room?" she asked, clearing her throat. "The East Wing," Damien replied. "I had the master guest suite prepared." Elena exhaled, relieved, so they wouldn't be sharing a bedroom. Not that she had truly expected it, but still, boundaries mattered. "I'll show you," Damien said unexpectedly. And then, without waiting for her response, he led the way. Elena followed. And as she stepped deeper into this unfamiliar world, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, her real life, had just been left behind in that elevator. The suite was bigger than her entire apartment. Elena stood in the doorway, staring at the massive space. A sitting area with plush furniture. A bathroom so large it had a soaking tub big enough to fit half a party. And in the center of the bedroom, an impossibly soft king-sized bed that looked completely untouched. Her modest belongings had been unpacked and arranged with military precision. And there, sitting dejectedly on the windowsill, was Mr. Pickles, her struggling pothouse plant, looking as out of place as she felt. Elena turned toward the walk-in closet, her eyes widening. "Your assistant even color-coded my wardrobe," she muttered, taking in the perfectly arranged rows of clothing. "That would be the house staff," Damien corrected from behind her. "You'll meet them tomorrow. I gave them the rest of the day off to allow you time to adjust." Adjust. As if she could possibly adjust to this. 24 hours ago she had been in her father's hospital room. Now she was married to Damien Wolfe, living in a penthouse that probably cost more than she would earn in several lifetimes. Her chest tightened. "This is insane," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Damien watched her carefully. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Would you like some time alone?" Elena swallowed and nodded. "Please. I'll be in my office if you need anything. Dinner is at 7. And with that, he turned and left, closing the door quietly behind him. The moment he was gone, Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She sat down on the edge of the bed and reached for her phone, fingers moving instinctively as she texted Mia. "Elena, I'm officially Mrs. Billionaire Robot. Send help." Mia's response was immediate. "How's the sex?" Elena nearly choked. It's not that kind of arrangement." "Bill. All that money and no orgasms? Worst deal ever." Despite everything, Elena laughed. Then she immediately covered her mouth, worried the sound might carry in the cavernous apartment. Her gaze drifted to the window, the city stretching endlessly below. Somewhere out there, the hospital still stood. And tomorrow, her father would be on his way to the treatment that could save his life. Worth it, she reminded herself. All of this, the strangeness, the surreal weight of it, was worth it. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Yes?" Damien's voice came through the door. "I forgot to mention, there's a dress in the closet for tonight. We have dinner reservations at Elysium at 8. The press will likely be there." Of course. The official unveiling of Mrs. Wolfe. Elena pulled the door open. Damien stood there, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The look, almost relaxed, was so unlike him that for a second she was caught off guard. She crossed her arms. "I don't remember a dinner debut being on today's schedule." "It's necessary," he said simply. "The sooner our marriage becomes public knowledge, the better. For all involved parties," she mused. "And the stock price," he added, not even pretending otherwise. She let out a breath. "Of course. Be ready by 7:30, he instructed. "The dress is Valentino." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him. "And what if I don't like the dress?" Damien paused. Then, with the faintest flicker of amusement, he looked back at her. "Then by all means, wear something else. Contrary to what you might believe, Elena, I'm not actually interested in controlling every aspect of your existence." She narrowed her eyes. "Just the important ones?" His lips barely curved. "Precisely." And then he disappeared down the hallway. Elena closed the door, exhaling slowly. Then curiosity got the best of her. She crossed the room, unzipping the garment bag. Inside was an elegant black dress, subtle yet stunning, with just the faintest shimmer to the fabric. It was tasteful, understated, beautiful. And she checked the tag, exactly her size. Her stomach tightened. "How did he know?" she muttered. Then she sighed. Of course, Damien Wolf knew everything. Laying the dress across the bed, she walked into the bathroom and turned on the faucet, watching as steaming water filled the massive tub. If she was about to be paraded around as Mrs. Wolf, she might as well do it looking the part. If she was going to play the part, she might as well enjoy some of the perks. An hour later, Elena was submerged in warm, fragrant bubbles, a glass of wine in hand, the kind that probably cost more than her entire weekly grocery budget. She had found the bottle in a small, built-in bar tucked into the corner of her suite. Of course, Damien Wolf would have a fully stocked bar in every room. She took a slow sip, letting herself breathe for the first time all day. And yet, even surrounded by luxury, her mind kept circling back to the same unsettling thought. Damien Wolf was not exactly what she had expected. Cold? Yes. Calculating? Definitely. But there were glimpses of something else beneath the surface, something almost human. And that, Elena realized with a flicker of unease, was far more dangerous than dealing with the emotionless machine she had prepared for. "Mrs. Wolf, how did you and Damien meet?" Elena took a measured sip of champagne, giving herself a second to recall the backstory they had rehearsed in the car. She felt his presence beside her, silent but commanding, watching her every move with quiet intensity. "Through a charity gala," she answered smoothly, offering the society reporter a carefully practiced smile. "I was coordinating the event, and Damien was one of the major donors." "Love at first sight?" the reporter asked, pen poised over her notepad, eager for a headline. Before Elena could respond, she felt it. Damien's hand, resting lightly on the small of her back. His touch was warm, steady, and it should have been impersonal, just another part of the act. But for some reason, it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I knew she was special immediately," Damien said. His voice had taken on a quality Elena had never heard before, something softer, almost genuine. "Elena challenges me in ways no one else dares to." Well, she thought, at least that part wasn't a lie. The reporter practically beamed at the uncharacteristic display from the usually reserved billionaire. "And the whirlwind romance?" she pressed. "You've only been seen together publicly a handful of times." Elena leaned slightly into Damien's touch, as it were the most natural thing in the world. "We preferred to keep our relationship private," she said smoothly. "Until we were certain." The reporter smiled knowingly. "Certain enough for marriage?" "When you know, Damien replied. His eyes met Elena's. There was something in his gaze, something unreadable but intense. For a split second, she forgot that this was all an act, forgot that every moment was calculated, rehearsed. Because for just that one breath, it felt real. And that was dangerous. Once the reporter left, satisfied with her exclusive, Elena and Damien were finally alone at their table. The restaurant's soft golden light cast shadows across the city's skyline, the world glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You're good at this," Damien remarked, finally withdrawing his hand. Elena took another sip of champagne, ignoring the strange way her skin missed the warmth of his touch. "I've worked enough events to know how to handle the press," she replied easily. Then, with a smirk, she added, "Though I must say, you surprised me with that 'she challenges me' line. Very convincing." Damien didn't even blink. It wasn't a line. He cut into his steak with precise measured movements. You do challenge me. Most people don't. Let me guess, Elena said dryly, twirling her pasta. They're too afraid of the great Damien Wolf? Precisely. He glanced up from his plate. Fear, or excessive deference, makes for inefficient interactions. Elena let out a laugh. Only you would evaluate human relationships in terms of efficiency. Damien tilted his head slightly. And how would you evaluate them? The question caught her off guard. Was he actually asking for her opinion? She hesitated, then set down her fork. Authenticity, she said finally. Mutual respect, the ability to be yourself without judgment, shared joy. Damien studied her as if she had just presented him with a complex business proposal. And in romantic relationships? He asked. There should be a spark, she said simply. Something inexplicable that draws you to the other person. Damien considered this. Ineffable qualities are difficult to quantify, he remarked. She shook her head, smiling to herself. That's the point, Alex, she teased. Not everything valuable can be measured. His eyes narrowed slightly at the nickname, but he didn't correct her, and for some reason, that small, silent victory made her smile. Damien's eyes flickered slightly at the nickname, but he didn't correct her this time. Progress, Elena thought with a private smile. The rest of dinner passed in unexpectedly comfortable conversation. Damien asked thoughtful questions about her event planning career, seeming genuinely interested in her work. And to her own surprise, Elena found herself intrigued by his latest project, developing affordable housing units. It seemed at odds with his ruthless reputation. It's still profitable, he explained when she voiced her surprise, just with longer-term returns and broader community benefits. She arched an eyebrow. So you do have a heart after all. The teasing remark slipped out before she could stop it, and immediately she regretted it. His expression shifted. The openness from just moments ago vanished, replaced by something cold and unreadable. It's sound business, he corrected. Then, without another word, he signaled for the check. Just like that, the moment of connection had passed. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, Elena felt a pang of disappointment. Outside, the paparazzi had multiplied. Cameras flashed like a relentless storm as Damien guided her to the waiting car, his arm placed protectively around her shoulders. Kiss her, someone shouted from the crowd. Elena tensed. Their contract had outlined basic public displays of affection, holding hands, the occasional affectionate glance, but a kiss? That hadn't been part of the deal. She glanced up at Damien uncertainly. He hesitated for only a second. Then, without a word, he turned to her, his gaze steady. A silent question. Elena gave the slightest nod. His hand came up, cupping her cheek, gentler than she expected. Her breath caught as he leaned down. Her eyes fluttered shut automatically, her pulse racing. It was supposed to be a brief, carefully calculated kiss, a performance. But the moment their lips touched, something happened. A sharp jolt like static electricity passed between them. What was meant to be quick suddenly lingered, deepened. Damien's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, and for a moment, just a moment, Elena forgot the flashing cameras, the watching crowd, everything. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless. Her mind spun. Damien looked equally stunned. For the first time since meeting him, his composure had cracked. His eyes, darker now, sharper, searched hers as if trying to understand what had just happened. The cameras went wild, capturing every second of a moment that had started as an act and had somehow become something else entirely. Damien was the first to recover. Without a word, he smoothly opened the car door for her. Elena slipped inside, her skin still tingling. Once the doors closed and they were finally alone, an awkward silence stretched between them. That was, she began, then faltered. Damien adjusted his tie, though it was already perfect. Convincing, he said, his voice a fraction rougher than usual. The press will have no doubts now. Right? Elena agreed quickly. That's what matters. Damien cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Tomorrow morning, I'll accompany you to the hospital for your father's transfer. The jet will be ready at 7 a.m. The abrupt change of subject was almost comical, but Elena was grateful for it. The last thing she needed was to analyze why her fake husband's kiss had affected her so deeply. Thank you, she said simply. The rest of the drive passed in silence, each of them staring out their respective windows, careful not to acknowledge the tension now humming between them. A knock on the bedroom door pulled Elena from sleep. "Elena, are you awake?" Damien's voice. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. Suppressing a groan, she threw on a robe before opening the door. Damien stood there, already dressed. Not in his usual suit, that was a surprise. Instead, he wore a fitted sweater and slacks, still effortlessly put together, but different, more casual, less CEO, more human. In his hand was a steaming mug. "Coffee," he explained, offering it to her. "Black, 1 sugar, correct?" Elena blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected him to remember something so small. "Yes," she said, taking the mug. "Thank you." "We leave in 30 minutes, he reminded her. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared down the hall. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic. For the first time since stepping into this marriage, she had no idea what she had gotten herself into. "The medical team is already at the hospital, preparing your father for transport." Damien's voice was steady, his tone as composed as ever. Elena nodded, taking a sip of the coffee he had brought her earlier. It was perfectly made, strong, smooth, 1 sugar, just the way she liked it. "I'll be ready," she said. True to his word, Damien had arranged everything seamlessly. By the time they arrived at the hospital, the medical staff was already transferring her father into the specialized transport vehicle that would take him to the private airfield. Elena stayed close, never letting go of his hand. She whispered reassurances, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. One of the specialists approached, his voice calm yet firm. "Keeping him in a medically induced coma during the flight is the safest option. He's in good hands." Elena swallowed hard. "The facility in Switzerland is the best in the world for this kind of treatment," the doctor added. She nodded, watching as the jet prepared for takeoff. Beside her, Damien stood silent, steady, an unexpected source of comfort. Then, out of nowhere, "Would you like to go with him?" Elena turned to him, startled. "What? To Switzerland," Damien clarified. "I can have the company jet ready within the hour. You could oversee his care personally." The offer caught her off guard. It was tempting, but she shook her head. "The doctor said it'll be weeks before he's conscious again, and I need to keep working. Not just for appearance's sake. My job matters to me." Damien studied her for a moment, then he nodded. "I understand. But the offer stands, should you change your mind." They walked back to the car in silence. And then, without thinking, Elena reached out. Her fingers curled around his, squeezing lightly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "For everything." Damien looked down at their joined hands. For a second, she expected him to pull away. Instead, he gently squeezed back. "You should rest today," he said as they got into the car. "I have meetings, but Rosa, the housekeeper, will be at the penthouse if you need anything." Elena nodded. The exhaustion, which she'd been holding off all morning, was beginning to creep in. "I think I'll take a nap," she admitted, leaning her head back against the seat. "And then call Mia. She's probably dying for updates on married life." Damien's mouth quirked slightly. "Your friend is protective." "She thinks you're going to lock me in a tower," Elena said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Or make me sign a blood oath to your corporate empire." Damien barely missed a beat. "Blood oaths are on Tuesdays," he replied dryly. "Today is just regular paperwork." Elena blinked. Had Damien Wolf just made a joke? A startled laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. It was probably funnier than it should have been. Maybe because of the emotional weight of the morning, or maybe just because it was so unexpected coming from him. Damien didn't laugh, but he watched her with that same unreadable expression, like she was a stock market trend he was trying to predict. "You should do that more often," Elena said, still catching her breath. "Schedule blood oaths?" "Another joke," she accused, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, be funny. It makes you seem almost human." Damien took a sip of his coffee. "I'll take that under advisement," he said smoothly. But there was something different in his eyes, something warmer than before. Back at the penthouse, Elena did exactly as she planned. She collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed, and fell into a deep sleep. When she woke hours later, something caught her eye. A note. It had been slipped under her door. "Elena, I'll be home late. Don't wait up for dinner. There's a weekly charity gala tomorrow evening. Your presence would be appreciated but not required if you're not feeling up to it. P.S. I had Mr. Pickles moved to the solarium. The kitchen plants were mocking his condition. Damien Alina read the note twice. And then, despite herself, she smiled. Because Damien Wolf, billionaire, businessman, and emotionally distant CEO, had just relocated her plant. Not only had Damien remembered her plant's ridiculous name, but he had apparently considered its well-being. Elena wasn't sure what was more surprising, the fact that he'd noticed, or the fact that he cared enough to do something about it. Maybe, just maybe, this arranged marriage wouldn't be quite as cold as she had feared. 3 weeks in, Elena found herself slipping into a routine that would have been unimaginable just a month ago. She continued working at the event planning company, despite Damien's earlier suggestion that she resign. "My career isn't optional, Alex," she had said firmly. And to his credit, he hadn't argued. In the evenings, they often shared dinner. What started as stiff, transactional conversations had begun to soften into something easier. They talked about their days, their projects, their thoughts. Nothing deeply personal, not yet. But the silences weren't as sharp as before. On the surface, they maintained the contractually perfect marriage. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Tonight was the Wolf Industries annual gala, the biggest social event of the year, and Elena's first official appearance as hostess. As the wife of Damien Wolf, she was expected to shine. She had been preparing for days, memorizing names and company histories from the briefing notes he had provided. But now, standing in front of the mirror in her suite, she finally let the nerves settle in. A deep midnight blue gown hugged her frame, shimmering subtly under the soft light. It had arrived that morning, another of Damien's choices. And somehow, as always, it fit her perfectly, both in size and in taste. She was fastening a delicate bracelet around her wrist when his voice startled her. "You look beautiful." Elena spun around, her breath catching slightly. Damien stood in the doorway, his gaze steady. For once, there was no cool calculation in his expression, only quiet observation. "Thank you," she managed, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. The importance of tonight wasn't lost on her. This was her debut. Not just as Damien's wife, but as part of his world. Without a word, Damien stepped forward. "Allow me," he offered. Elena hesitated for only a second before turning her wrist toward him. His fingers brushed against her skin, warm, precise, as he secured the clasp with ease. But his touch lingered, just for a moment. Then nervous? His voice was softer than usual. Elena exhaled, terrified. "Half the country's business elite will be there," she continued, forcing a smile. "Judging your surprising choice of bride," Damien raised an eyebrow. "Surprising? Don't pretend you don't know what they're thinking," she said, turning back to the mirror. "The middle-class event planner who somehow landed the city's most eligible billionaire? They'll be looking for the catch." Damien was silent for a moment. Then, as if considering her words carefully, he said, "The catch is that I'm fortunate you agreed to marry me at all." Elena stilled. Of all the responses she had expected, that wasn't one of them. Her eyes met his in the mirror, searching. These past few weeks had been— Damien hesitated, as if searching for the right word. "Pleasant," he finally settled on. Elena let out a laugh. "Such high praise, Alex." His lips twitched. "Be careful or I might start warming up to you." She smirked. "Too late." His gaze lingered for half a second longer than necessary. Then, "We should go. The car is waiting." The gala was being held at the city's most luxurious hotel, which of course, Damien happened to own. Elena mentally rehearsed the names of key business figures as the car rolled to a stop. Damien had provided her with extensive notes, which she had studied diligently. As they approached the entrance, the red carpet lined with reporters, he spoke low enough for only her to hear. "Remember," he said, "these people respect power. Don't let them intimidate you." Elena lifted her chin. "As Mrs. Wolf, you outrank virtually everyone in that room." She glanced at him, a teasing glint in her eye. "Except you." Damien's lips curled into something dangerously close to a real smile. "In public, we're equals." Then, with a knowing tilt of his head, he added, "In private? Well." His smirk turned wicked. "We both know you've never followed my instructions anyway." Elena grinned. "True," she said, feigning regret. "I'm terribly inefficient that way." His quiet chuckle was almost lost beneath the flashing cameras. Almost. The moment they entered the ballroom, The weight of 100 curious gazes fell upon them. Elena straightened her spine, and then, instinctively, she slipped her hand into Damien's. His grip was firm, steady, and somehow at that moment she was grateful for it. Mr. Wolf, Mrs. Wolf, a photographer, approached. Could we get a picture? Elena turned toward the camera, preparing to smile. But then, she felt it. Damien's fingers brushing ever so slightly over hers, just enough to make her wonder. Was it part of the act, or something else entirely? Mr. Wolf, Mrs. Wolf, could we get a photo for the society page? Before Elena could react, Damien's arm slid around her waist, pulling her effortlessly against his side. They smiled for the camera, the perfect image of wedded bliss. When the photographer moved on, Elena murmured, "Convincing." "Very," Damien replied, but there was something odd in his tone, something she couldn't quite place. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of introductions, polite conversation, and carefully measured smiles. To her surprise, Elena found herself enjoying the challenge of navigating the intricate web of social politics. Her years as an event planner had prepared her well for handling difficult personalities and remembering key details. She wasn't just surviving in Damien Wolf's world, she was thriving. "Damien never told us his bride was so charming," remarked Elise Harrington, the wife of one of his board members and a notorious social gatekeeper. "Damien prefers to understate things," Elena replied smoothly. She sipped her champagne before adding, "It's why his quarterly projections are always so conservative." Elise's eyes widened slightly before she let out a delighted laugh. "I like her," she declared to Damien, who had materialized at Elena's side. "She's not at all what I expected." Damien's hand found the small of Elena's back, a touch that had become increasingly familiar throughout the night. "She exceeds expectations in every way," he said simply. Elena felt the heat of his palm through the fabric of her dress, and for reasons she refused to examine, her heart skipped a beat. As the evening progressed, whispers trailed behind them. They seemed genuinely happy. "I've never seen Wolf so attentive to anyone. Did you see how he looks at her?" The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Their pretend marriage appeared more convincing than many of the real ones in the room. Then, as the orchestra struck the first notes of a waltz, Damien surprised her. He extended his hand. "Shall we?" Elena hesitated for only a second before slipping her fingers into his. "I didn't know you danced." "There are many things you don't know about me," he murmured, leading her onto the dance floor. Damien turned out to be an exceptional dancer, guiding her with the same confidence and precision he brought to everything. But Elena wasn't easily outmatched. She had learned ballroom dancing years ago for corporate events, and tonight she met him step for step. "Another hidden talent, Mrs. Wolf?" Damien murmured, drawing her just a fraction closer than necessary. Elena tilted her chin up, meeting his gaze. "I'm full of surprises." A small smirk played at the corner of his lips. And yet, as they moved in perfect synchrony, something shifted. Forgetting the crowd, forgetting the cameras, forgetting that this was all a performance. Her head fit just beneath his chin, and for the first time, Elena allowed herself to relax into his hold. Then Damien's hand spread wider across her back. The heat of his touch burned through the delicate fabric of her gown. Her breath caught. "Damien," she whispered, but she didn't even know what she had intended to say. His usual control wavered. His eyes, intense and unreadable, locked onto hers, as if trying to figure her out. For a brief moment, the rest of the world faded away. Then, a sudden crash, the sound of shattering glass, raised voices near the entrance. Damien tensed immediately. His entire demeanor shifted from calculated charm to sharp, immediate control. Elena felt it instantly. Something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, feeling the change in his posture. "Security issue," he muttered. Then, without another word, he started toward the commotion. Elena grabbed his hand before he could pull away. "Wait," she said, voice low. "We're supposed to be inseparable newlyweds, remember?" Damien looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he gave a curt nod, keeping her slightly behind him as they approached the entrance. A man in a disheveled suit was shouting at the security guards, his voice rough with anger. "I have a right to be here." One of the guards blocked his path. "Sir, you need to step outside. This company destroyed my life." Elena felt Damien go completely rigid beside her. She glanced up at him, but his expression was unreadable. Then, a single name escaped his lips, so low she barely heard it. James Porter. Elena's stomach tightened. She had seen that name in the research Damien had given her. "Who is he?" she murmured. Damien's jaw clenched. "Former VP of operations." His eyes never left the man. "I had to let him go. Fired last year for ethical violations." Damien's voice was calm, controlled, but there was something razor-sharp beneath the surface. Before Elena could process his words, the man, James Porter, spotted them. His expression twisted with rage. "You ruined me, Wolf." He lunged forward, but security caught him before he got too close. "My wife left. My reputation is in shambles, all because I disagreed with your precious efficiency models." Elena felt Damien tense beside her. "Low enough for only her to hear," he murmured. Porter was embezzling funds. He also cut safety protocols to boost his performance numbers, endangering his own workers in the process. Porter struggled against the guards, eyes blazing. "You're a heartless machine, Wolf," he spat. "You don't care about anything but profit. Does your pretty new wife know that yet? Does she know what you really are?" The air turned thick, heavy. For a split second, Elena felt it. Damien flinching. It was almost imperceptible, but she noticed. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward, still holding his hand. "Mr. Porter," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. All eyes turned to her. "My husband values integrity above all else. Perhaps that's something you should consider." Silence. Porter faltered, momentarily thrown off. Then security hauled him out, his protests fading into the distance. Conversation slowly resumed, but the mood had shifted. Damien turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Elena met his gaze. "I know." A pause. Then his voice softer. "Why did you?" She hesitated. Why had she? It had been instinctive, unthinking, even unexpected to herself. "Because," she started, then exhaled. "Because I've seen enough of you these past few weeks to know you're not what he said." She tilted her head slightly, searching his face. Not entirely, anyway. Something flickered in Damien's eyes. Vulnerability? Gratitude? She wasn't sure. Before he could say anything, an older man approached, leaning on a cane. "Quite a display of loyalty from your new bride," he remarked, amusement lacing his tone. Damien immediately straightened, his entire demeanor shifting, more formal, more controlled. "Judge Harrington," he said respectfully. "May I introduce my wife, Elena?" The name clicked in her memory. Judge William Harrington, one of Wolf Industries' most influential board members. Elena extended her hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Judge." The older man took her hand with old-world courtesy, his sharp eyes twinkling. "I must say, I was quite surprised by Damien's sudden marriage." Then he smiled knowingly. "But now I understand." Damien shifted slightly beside her, clearly uncomfortable. The judge chuckled. "He's found someone who sees through that carefully constructed facade of his." Elena blinked. Damien shot the judge a flat look. "Judge Harrington enjoys overanalyzing situations," he said dryly. "And Damien enjoys pretending he's made of stone," the judge countered, his voice warm with familiarity. "He's been that way since he was a boy. His grandfather, my dear old friend, was exactly the same. Brilliant men. Terrible at admitting they have hearts." Elena's lips curved at Damien's obvious discomfort. She glanced at him playfully. "The heart exists beneath the surface," she said thoughtfully. "Like an underground river. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there, shaping everything above." The judge let out a delighted laugh. "Poetic and perceptive. Damien, you've outdone yourself." As Judge Harrington moved on to greet other guests, Damien turned to her, something unreadable in his expression. "An underground river?" Elena shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "It made sense in my head." Damien was silent for a long moment. Then, "Insightful." Just one word, but the way he said it made something shift in her chest. The rest of the evening passed without further incident, but every so often, Elena felt Damien watching her. His gaze carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. By the time they slid into the back of the car, exhaustion finally settled over her. Yet somehow, she also felt energized. Damien adjusted his cufflinks, then glanced at her. "You were magnificent tonight," he said. His voice was quieter than usual, more sincere. Elena turned her head, watching the city lights flash by through the window. "Everyone was impressed," he added. She let out a soft exhale. The strangest part? For the first time she realized. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. "Even you?" Elena's voice was quieter than she intended, but the lateness of the hour made her bolder than usual. Damien turned to look at her. His expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. Especially me. Something warm and unexpected unfurled in her chest. This, whatever this was, wasn't part of their agreement. This genuine admiration, this growing connection, this pull between them. By the time they arrived back at the penthouse, the silence between them was heavier, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. As always, Damien walked her to her bedroom door. It was a simple gesture, one he had done every night since their marriage. A quiet, old-fashioned courtesy that had surprised her from the beginning. "Good night, Elena," he said, his voice lower than usual. She hesitated. Suddenly, she didn't want the night to end. "Damien." He stopped, waiting, watching her with that intense gaze that always made her feel like he saw things in her she hadn't even admitted to herself. "Thank you," she said at last, "for trusting me to represent you tonight." Damien stepped closer, so close she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from him. "Thank you," he murmured, "for defending me." "You didn't have to." "Maybe I wanted to," Elena admitted softly. A pause. Neither of them moved. Elena's pulse was a quiet drum in her ears. She was acutely aware of the mere inches separating them. Of the way Damien's eyes dropped briefly to her lips before meeting her gaze again. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back. "Good night, Elena," he repeated, more formal this time. He turned, starting to walk away. "Damien," he paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "I got a call from the clinic in Switzerland today," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My father, he's showing brain activity. The treatment is working." Damien's expression softened instantly. "That's wonderful news." "Yes." Elena swallowed against the lump forming in her throat. "And it's because of you." He shook his head slightly. "No, it's because of what you were willing to sacrifice for him." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then, without another word, Damien turned and disappeared down the hallway. Elena exhaled shakily, closing her bedroom door and leaning against it. Her mind raced. This arrangement, this marriage of convenience, was turning into something neither of them had anticipated, and that terrified her, almost as much as it thrilled her. "I think I'm falling in love with him." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Across from her, Mia nearly choked on her latte. "With Robot Man?" she sputtered. "Are you serious?" Elena nodded miserably. "It wasn't supposed to happen. It's completely irrational." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Honey, the heart isn't exactly known for following contractual obligations." She reached across the cafe table, squeezing Elena's hand. "But are you sure? This could just be Stockholm Syndrome or something." "It's not that," Elena insisted. Mia gave her a skeptical look. Elena sighed, staring down at her untouched cappuccino. "He's different than I thought." She hesitated, then confessed the words that had been circling in her mind for days. "There's so much more to him beneath the surface. He's brilliant, of course, but also thoughtful in ways no one would expect." Mia still didn't look convinced. Elena pressed on. "Last week, he rescheduled a board meeting because it conflicted with my video call with my father's doctors. Her father had woken up 2 weeks ago. Recovery would be slow, but the prognosis was excellent. And Damien had ensured she could speak with the medical team regularly, had even arranged a secure video connection to her father's hospital room." Mia leaned back in her chair. "That's basic decency, not love material." Elena frowned. "Then, what about the fact that he has Mr. Pickles moved into the sunlight every morning?" Mia blinked. "Or that he remembers how I take my coffee, and sometimes, without saying anything, brings it to me in bed. Or that he listens when I talk. Really listens, even when it has nothing to do with business." Mia's skeptical expression softened slightly. "Okay, that does sound promising." But then she sighed, lowering her voice. "Elena, what happens when your father fully recovers?" Elena stilled. Mia looked at her gently. "When the contract ends?" A cold spike of dread ran through her, because the thought had been creeping into her mind lately, and she wasn't ready for the answer. A cold dread settled in Elena's chest. She had been trying not to think about it. Not to think about how this chapter of her life, unexpected, confusing, exhilarating, was destined to end. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "He's never given any indication that he wants more than what we agreed to." Mia gave her a pointed look. "Have you?" Elena shook her head. How could I? What if I'm just convenient? What if he's just being kind because we're stuck in this situation together? There's only one way to find out, Mia said matter-of-factly. You have to tell him. The very thought made Elena's stomach twist. And risk making the next 6 months unbearably awkward if he doesn't feel the same? She shook her head. No, thank you. So you'll just suffer in silence? Mia challenged. That doesn't sound like the Elena Carter I know. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. From Damien. Need to cancel dinner tonight. Emergency board meeting. Don't wait up. Elena frowned. The message was short, abrupt, unlike him. Problem? Mia asked, noting her expression. Damien canceled dinner, Elena said, trying to keep her voice neutral. She didn't want to admit, even to herself, how much she had been looking forward to it. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, talking about their day. A routine she had come to treasure. Mia raised an eyebrow. A board meeting? On a Friday night? Elena shrugged, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping into her chest. That's business, I guess. But as the hours passed, that feeling of unease only grew. When Elena returned to the penthouse that evening, the silence felt wrong, too empty, too final. Mrs. Wolfe, Rosa the housekeeper, greeted her warmly. Mr. Wolfe left a file for you on the kitchen counter. He said it was important. Elena frowned. A file? She thanked Rosa before stepping into the kitchen. There on the sleek marble countertop sat a manila folder, unmarked. Something about it made her hesitate before she reached for it. She flipped it open and felt the blood drain from her face. Dissolution of marriage agreement, divorce papers. Damien had drawn up divorce papers. Her hands trembled as she sank onto a bar stool, her knees suddenly weak. She scanned the document, her vision blurring at the edges. Everything was laid out in cold, precise legal language. A generous settlement, custody of all plants currently residing in the penthouse, a full fulfillment of his promises regarding her father's medical care. Everything was correct. Everything was appropriate. Everything was Damien. Except for the timing. They had agreed to 1 full year. They weren't even halfway through. So why now? Had he tired of their arrangement? Had he found their growing closeness as uncomfortable as she had found it thrilling? Hot tears burned at the back of her eyes. She reread the document, hoping she had missed something, some explanation, some reason. But the worst part, he hadn't even told her himself. He had just left it for her to find. Elena clenched her jaw, her heartbreak quickly hardening into anger. She reached for her phone to call Mia, then stopped. No, this wasn't something she could vent about over coffee. This was something she needed to handle herself. She stood, exhaling sharply, wiping at her eyes before changing into jeans and a sweater. Then, grabbing her keys and purse, she strode toward the door. She knew exactly where to find him. If there was an emergency board meeting happening, there was only one place it would be. Wolfe Tower, where all of Damien's biggest decisions were made. And tonight, she intended to make him answer for this one. 30 minutes later, Elena stood in the gleaming lobby of Wolfe Tower, her heart pounding. She approached the security desk, trying to ignore the gnawing doubt clawing at her chest. The night guard eyed her warily. Can I help you, ma'am? She lifted her chin. I'm Elena Wolfe, she said, forcing more confidence into her voice than she felt. My husband is in a board meeting upstairs. The guard frowned, checking his computer. I don't have any board meetings listed tonight, Mrs. Wolfe. Her stomach dropped. No meeting? Then where was he? Elena's mind raced, but she kept her face calm. Call his executive assistant, Vivienne, she said smoothly. She'll confirm I should be allowed up. The guard hesitated before picking up the phone. Elena crossed her arms, ignoring the creeping suspicion curling in her gut. Seconds later, the guard nodded. She confirmed, he said, handing her a visitor's badge. Mr. Wolfe's office is on the top floor. Elena took the badge with steady hands, but inside everything was unraveling. What had Damien lied to her about? And more importantly, was she ready for the answer? The elevator ride to the executive floor gave Elena a few precious moments to collect her thoughts, to temper her hurt with reason. There had to be an explanation. Damien wasn't cruel. She knew that now, even if she had once thought otherwise. But this was something else entirely. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Most of the floor was dark, the security lighting casting long shadows. Only one office was illuminated, Damien's. Light spilled from beneath his door. Elena hesitated. Then, setting her jaw, she knocked firmly. A pause. Then, "Come in." His voice sounded tired. She pushed open the door. Damien was sitting behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled. A rare crack in his usual polished armor, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked unsettled. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted to pure shock. "Elena," he stood abruptly. "What are you doing here?" She held up the manila folder. "Funny, I was going to ask you the same thing." His jaw tensed. "Elena." "Emergency board meeting?" She cut in, her voice sharp. Damien's expression grew guarded. "You weren't supposed to find that yet." "Clearly," she said tightly. She took a step forward, her fingers curling around the edges of the folder. "So tell me, Damien." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. "Was this your plan? To ambush me with divorce papers over breakfast? Or just have your lawyers serve me like any other business transaction?" Damien exhaled, raking a hand through his already tousled hair. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Her voice rose, frustration spilling over. "Explain why you're ending this early. Explain why you didn't even have the decency to tell me." Damien slammed his palm against his desk, startling her into silence. "I couldn't." The quiet intensity in his voice knocked the breath from her lungs. He clenched his jaw, as if struggling to hold himself together. "I couldn't look you in the eye and suggest ending this marriage." His voice dropped lower, knowing it was the last thing I actually wanted. Elena's heart stopped. Her fingers tightened around the folder. "What?" Damien moved out from behind his desk, his usual composed demeanor fractured. "Your father's doctors called me today," he said. "His recovery has exceeded expectations. He won't need the specialized facility after next month. They're recommending he transfer back to a local hospital for outpatient rehabilitation." Elena blinked. That's wonderful news," she said, still trying to process. "But what does that have to do with this?" She lifted the divorce papers. "Everything," Damien said, his voice strained. "This arrangement, this marriage, was built on an obligation. And now, that obligation is gone." Understanding dawned in Elena's chest, slow and sharp. "You think I'd want to leave the second my father is better?" He didn't answer. But his silence was enough. A bitter laugh bubbled up before she could stop it. "You ridiculous man," she breathed. "For someone so brilliant, you can be incredibly dense." Damien frowned. "I don't understand." Elena took a shaky breath and stepped closer. "I was miserable tonight because you canceled dinner." She saw his brows furrow, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Not because I was obligated to have dinner with you, but because I look forward to it. Because somewhere along the way, this arrangement, this marriage of convenience, became the most real relationship I've ever had." For a second, hope flashed across Damien's face, but he tempered it, his usual caution snapping back into place. "Elena, if you're saying this out of some sense of gratitude—" "Oh, shut up, Damien," she interrupted, her voice exasperated. He stilled. She took another step, standing so close she could see every flicker of emotion in his darkened gaze. "I'm saying this because I'm in love with you, you impossible man. And if you'd bothered to talk to me instead of drawing up legal documents, you might have discovered that." For the first time in his life, Damien Wolfe was speechless. Elena watched as a kaleidoscope of emotions crossed his usually unreadable face. Disbelief, hope, and then a joy so raw and unguarded, it took her breath away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse. "Say it again." Elena stepped closer, reaching up to cup Damien's face between her hands. Her palms were warm against his skin, grounding them both in this moment. "I love you, Damien Wolfe." Her voice was steady, certain. "Not your money. Not the things you've done for my father. Just you, with all your spreadsheets, efficiency models, and that brilliant mind that somehow can't comprehend a simple human emotion when it's staring you in the face." Damien let out a shaky breath. His hands came up to cover hers, fingers threading through hers as if anchoring himself. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you called me a calculator in your father's hospital room," he admitted. His voice was quiet, but unmistakably raw. "I've never met anyone who challenges me, surprises me, or understands me the way you do." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "The thought of you leaving once our arrangement ended." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "I couldn't bear it, so I thought I'd give you an easy way out before I got even more attached." Elena let out a breathless laugh, amusement and affection swirling together in her chest. For a strategic genius, that was a terrible plan. Damien's lips curled into a real smile, the kind that made her heart ache in the best way. Clearly, he agreed. I've been operating with incomplete data. Elena arched an eyebrow, playing along. And what data would that be? His gaze locked onto hers, serious and unwavering. That you could possibly love me too. A warmth spread through her, filling every hollow space she hadn't even realized existed. Well, she whispered, her heart swelling, now you have all the relevant information. She tilted her head slightly. What's your analysis, Mr. Wolf? Damien's answer wasn't in words. It was in the way he kissed her. Slow, deliberate, consuming. Unlike the kisses they had shared for the cameras, this one wasn't for anyone else. No contracts, no arrangements, just them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Damien rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Elena. His voice was rough with emotion. No contracts, no obligations, just me, loving you, if you'll have me. Elena let her fingers trail down the collar of his shirt, her touch feather light. I'll have to think about it, she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Perhaps we can negotiate terms. Damien chuckled, a deep, real laugh that she realized she had never truly heard before. What terms would you propose, Mrs. Wolf? She lifted a finger, mockingly serious. First, you never again make major decisions about our relationship without consulting me. Agreed, Damien said immediately. Second, she continued, fighting a smile, Mr. Pickles continues to receive premium window placement. He is, after all, your favorite child. Damien smirked. I wouldn't dream of relegating him to inferior lighting conditions. Elena's fingers curled into his shirt. And third, she looked up at him, voice softer now. We make this marriage real. Not for appearances, not for business, not for obligations, just for us. Damien's eyes darkened, filled with something deep and undeniable. Those are acceptable terms, he murmured, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. But then, I feel I should counter with a proposal of my own. Elena raised an eyebrow. Oh, Damien took her hands in his, and then, to her utter shock, he lowered himself onto one knee. Still holding her hands, his expression was uncharacteristically open. Elena Carter Wolf, he said slowly, I've never believed in fate or destiny or anything I couldn't quantify. A slow breath. Until you. Her chest tightened. Will you marry me? A pause. Then, again? She asked, laughing through the tears that had suddenly welled in her eyes. Damien's lips twitched. I'm not proposing to my wife, he corrected gently. I'm proposing to the woman I love. He squeezed her hands. The paperwork is incidental. A breathless laugh escaped her as she blinked back tears. Yes, she whispered. Her voice broke on the word. Yes, Damien Wolf. I will marry you again. This time, with no contracts. Damien stood, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that promised forever. And this time, neither of them were pretending. I still can't believe you rented out the entire botanical garden for a wedding reception. Elena leaned against Damien's shoulder, watching as her father twirled Mia around the dance floor, his recovery nearly complete. Damien barely looked up. It was efficient, he replied smoothly. Elena snorted. Efficient, my ass. It was romantic. Damien tilted his head slightly, considering. Same thing. Elena shook her head, laughing softly as she turned to face him. And when she did, he was already looking at her, like she was the only thing that mattered. You're impossible, she murmured. Damien smiled. You love me anyway. And that was the only contract she ever needed. Damien kept a perfectly straight face. One location, maximum privacy, and optimal aesthetic conditions for Mr. Pickles to serve as ring bearer. Elena laughed, tilting her face up to meet his. You just wanted to see my reaction when I walked into a greenhouse filled with orchids. Damien's lips twitched. That too, he admitted. Then, his voice softened, his eyes filled with something deeper. But mostly because I'm a businessman, Elena. His fingers traced lazy circles against her waist. I recognize a good investment when I see one. And marrying you twice is the best deal I've ever made. Around them, family and close friends celebrated their renewal of vows, a ceremony that made official what their hearts had already known for months. No press, no business advantages, just two people who had found love in the most unexpected of arrangements. Elena exhaled a happy sigh. Who would have thought? She murmured. that being forced to marry an arrogant, emotionally unavailable billionaire would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? Damien's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer. I prefer to think of it, he said smoothly, as a strategic life partnership with unforeseen emotional dividends. Elena rolled her eyes, grinning. Romantic as ever, Mr. Wolf. He smirked, his lips brushing her ear. I save my true romanticism for private. A delicious shiver ran down her spine. And speaking of which, Mrs. Wolf, his voice dropped lower, I believe we have a honeymoon to begin. As they slipped away from their own reception, hand in hand, Elena glanced back one last time. At the people she loved, at the life she never expected to have, at the man who had gone from contracted husband to something infinitely more real. A marriage that had started as a business deal had become something neither of them had been looking for, but both had desperately needed. Sometimes, Elena thought as Damien pulled her into another slow, lingering kiss under the starlit sky, the coldest hearts simply needed the right person to thaw them. And sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings led to the most perfect endings. As Elena and Damien disappeared into the night, hand in hand, their journey from a contract-bound arrangement to a love neither of them had expected was finally complete. But before we close this chapter, we want to take a moment to thank you, our incredible readers, for following this story from the very beginning. Thank you for every moment you spent immersed in their world, for every emotion you felt alongside them, and for allowing this unexpected love story to unfold in your imagination. Now, we'd love to hear from you. On a scale from Sarsmar 1 to 10, how would you rate this journey of love, transformation, and second chances? Drop your rating and share your thoughts. We can't wait to hear what you think. Until next time, thank you for being part of this story.